Thank you. Well, I'll begin with an old story, but it fits. Louis talked about how different it is here from 20 or 30 years ago. I spoke here in 1995, and just like then, I'm the 9th speaker tonight. So once again, I feel like Zsa Zsa Gabor's 9th husband on their wedding night. I know what to do, but I'll be damned if I know how to make it interesting. To the members of the Lee family, Nancy and Candace, to Louis and his family, to all of you friends and supporters of the American Civil Liberties Union, to Senator King and Mary, to Attorney General Janet Mills, it's a real pleasure, and I mean it sincerely, for me to be here this evening for many reasons. First and foremost, to recognize and honor Shep Lee and his family for their large and continuing contributions to our community, to our state, to our society. Shep was one of my closest personal friends, a constant source of sound advice, wise counsel. Shep was warm, outgoing. He loved people and politics. He had an opinion on every subject. He was never shy about expressing his opinion, especially in my case when he disagreed with me. He let me know it. Simply put, Shep was one of the finest persons I've ever had the privilege of knowing and counting as a friend. It's really wonderful and heartwarming to see his passion for justice and equal opportunity being carried on by his 4 remarkable children. You've heard from them this evening: Jonathan, Cathy, Adam, and Beth. The finest compliment I can pay to you is that your father was very proud of all of you, and that pride would grow as you continue along the path that he blazed for you. It's also a special treat to be in the company of Louis Scolnik, one of Shep's closest friends, and who, along with Shep, was one of my mentors and role models, and in whose name the Lees fittingly are being honored. It's also an honor to be introduced by our Senator Angus King, who's here with his wife, Mary. Angus is doing an outstanding job representing the people of Maine in the United States, and I ask you all to join me in expressing our thanks to him for the way he's doing it. And I'm pleased to join in supporting the work of the Maine Civil Liberties Union here. The subject of this evening is immigration. Angus touched on it, and we can feel it all across our country today with talk of walls and bans and the demonization of those who treat some of those who seek to enter our country. So I'd like to say a few words on that subject. I'd like to begin with a story involving Louis and Shep. A long time ago, at a surprise birthday party for Shep at his home in Auburn, Louis, Frank Coffin, and I were asked to speak. We were supposed to make a point and to do it with humor. No one who was there can recall a word of what Frank or I said, but everybody remembers what Louis said. And he talked about immigration way back then. He related what he said was the true story of the Lee family. Until then, most of us thought it began when Shep's father, Joe Lifshitz, and his sisters emigrated from Russia to the United States, ending up in Auburn, where Joe opened what became a successful Dodge car dealership. You can see it described pictorially on the inside page of your program. But Louis set the record straight. Neither I nor anyone else could ever do justice to his presentation, but in summary, he described the real Lee family story as beginning as wealthy planters in Virginia, part of the aristocratic clan that produced the great military leader Robert E. Lee, the commanding general of the Confederate Army. After the defeat of the South in the Civil War, the Lees had to flee the country, and they settled in St. Petersburg. There were no Lees in Russia then, but there were lots of Lifshitzes. So to fit in, they adopted that name. There they became wealthy landowners, got to know the Tsar and his family. And after the Tsar was overthrown by the communists, they had to flee again. So they returned to their native country, this time settling in Maine, resuming their historic name and role in society. I can still recall the sparkle in Louis's eyes as he told that story, and I remember sitting next to Shep, laughing so hard that tears ran down his cheeks. Of course, Louis was making a point about immigration, about America, about human nature. The reality was that Louis's family, like Shep's father, had joined the hundreds of thousands of Jews fleeing the bigotry and violence that then swept Russia and all of Eastern Europe. In that same era, my father's parents joined millions of Irish who left the poverty and discrimination of their homeland to seek freedom and opportunity in the New World. And my mother left religious conflict in her native Lebanon for that same freedom and opportunity. We cannot foresee fate or understand how it happened, but all of them ended up within a few miles of each other in central Maine. And in a single generation, Louis became one of Maine's most respected jurists. Shep became one of the state's most successful businessmen, and I became a United States Senator. Shep even performed the nearly impossible feat of serving simultaneously on the board, the national board of the liberal ACLU and the conservative National Association of Auto Dealers. Now, as Angus pointed out, the reality is that if you go back far enough, everybody in this room, indeed everybody in this country, came from somewhere else. Humans first appeared on Earth about 200,000 years ago in what is now Africa. They spread slowly around the world, finally reaching the American hemisphere 15,000 years ago, when small bands from Central Asia crossed the then land bridge between Siberia and Alaska. 500 years ago, the Europeans came west across the Atlantic. And from the very beginning, as the British, the French, the Spanish, and the Dutch fought one another and the Native Americans for control of North America, there was demonization, stereotyping, hostility, and violence toward those who were different. After the United States came into existence, immigrants were at first welcomed in settling a vast, empty continent. The first restrictive law was passed in 1882, the Chinese Exclusion Act, a reaction to the influx of Chinese laborers to help build the Transcontinental Railroad. In 1906, San Francisco was devastated by an earthquake and succeeding fires. Many buildings, including most of the schools in the city, were destroyed. To ease the pressure, the city passed an ordinance prohibiting any child of Japanese ancestry, including children born in the United States, from entering the public schools. They were required to attend a separate, segregated school for Asians. And to demonstrate how universal racism and discrimination are, the Japanese were as much bothered by the fact that they had to go to school with the Chinese and Koreans as they were with not being able to go to school with the white Americans. Almost every group that came to America was subjected at first to hostility and many to violence. African Americans, the only group who came here involuntarily, suffered most. A century of slavery, and then another century of segregation and discrimination. The Irish here recall that all across our major cities, the signs read, "Irish need not apply." And in magazines in Maine, cartoons were published and republished showing the face of a human being on the body of an ape, describing Irish as subhuman. All Italians were stigmatized by the crimes of a few. When the United States entered the First World War, German Americans were demonized, as were Japanese Americans in the Second World War. The Ku Klux Klan is best remembered for its violence against African Americans in the South. But in fact, the organization reached its peak in the North, including in Maine, in the 1920s on a platform of hatred and violence directed specifically against Catholics and Jews. And after African Americans, no group in our nation's history has suffered discrimination as much or as long as American Jews. And yet, tremendous contributions have been made to and for our country by members of each of those reviled groups. The earliest of them got their hands on the bottom rung of the ladder of American success, and they pulled themselves up. Their children and their grandchildren stood on their shoulders and climbed even higher, in some cases to the pinnacle of success. Every rational American knows that we cannot return to the days of open immigration. It is simply not possible, politically feasible, morally, or otherwise, to think that every person who wants to come to America can do so. But there must be realistic limits on how many can enter and who they are. And the only way we can achieve that is to work together as a people for a policy that focuses on how we can live up to our principles as a just, open, and welcoming society. We must focus on who we want to enter, not just on who we want to keep out or who we want to throw out, and how can we continue to replenish our society with new people to their benefit and ours. Because from the very beginning, Our country has been enriched by new people, new ideas, new energy, new vision. We've made many mistakes. I've noted just a few of them. There have been very difficult and tragic times. But our country has emerged from every crisis a better, stronger, more free, more diverse nation. As Angus noted, 6 of the 7 American recipients of last year's Nobel Peace Prize were immigrants. 3 of the most valuable business enterprises in the world are Apple, Amazon, and Google. Apple was created by Steve Jobs, whose father was born in Syria. Jeff Bezos, who created Amazon, was adopted by a family born in Cuba. And a co-founder of Google was Sergey Brin, who himself was born in Russia. Genius knows no language, no race, no religion. It can be found wherever human beings exist, but it is more likely to flourish where there is freedom, education, and opportunity for all, where innovation is encouraged and success is celebrated. In other words, a place like America. Our economy is by far the largest and the strongest in the world. Our military strength is unequaled. 9 of the 10 most valuable business brands in the world are American, even though we comprise only 6% of the world's population. And 15 of the world's top 20 universities are American. 91% of online searches are conducted through American companies, and 99% of smartphones are on American-made operating systems. This talk of an America in decline is nonsense, contradicted by history, contradicted by the facts. We are and will be, for as far into the future as human beings can see, the dominant world power, but not just in military power and economic strength, important, indeed necessary as they are. The major contributor to our success is that our strength and influence lies ultimately in our ideals. In the United States, our power and strength have been infused with those ideals that are the basis and the promise of American life. They're not easily summarized, but surely they include the sovereignty of the people, individual liberty, our highest value, opportunity for all, an independent judicial system, and the rule of law applied equally to all and, crucially, to the government itself. It is our commitment to these ideals that makes us Americans, not our race, not our heritage, not our religion. If the ACLU stands for anything, it stands for that principle. You are an American if you commit to our ideals, whatever your color, whatever your religion, wherever you came from. And our Constitution is more than just a compilation of laws and procedures. It is a statement of our values, especially those of equal justice, equal rights, equal opportunity for all. We Americans have much to be concerned about, but much more to be thankful for. And we now need the wisdom and the strength to extend education, opportunity, jobs, and hope to more and more people in our country and around the world. I want to close with brief comments about my parents, to whom I owe all that I am and all that I've done. As I said earlier, my father's parents were born in Ireland, and became part of one of the great migrations in all of human history. But my father never knew his parents. His mother died, his father couldn't care for their children, and my father was raised in an orphanage. After several years there, he was adopted by an elderly, childless couple and raised in Waterville. He left school after the 3rd grade and worked a long, hard life as a laborer, ending up as a janitor at Colby College. My parents were very poor, and they died penniless. But in their minds, they were successful because each of their children got an education, and then, thanks to the openness of American society, each of us has lived a life far beyond the imagination of my parents. My father was a very quiet man. He spoke little, never about his upbringing. On the morning that I was to leave home to go away to college, we sat down at the kitchen table. He was wearing his work clothes. My mother had just returned from work on the night shift in a textile mill. She was covered with lint and with the oil that was used to lubricate the machines. There were no worker protections then. My father said to me, "You're a smart young boy. I know you're going to do well, but I want you now to take a good look at me and look at your mother. And wherever you go, whatever you do, don't you ever forget where you came from." I never have, and I hope that every person in this room will never forget where you came from. Often, as we sat at the kitchen table, my mother would say to us, "You should see Lebanon. It's so beautiful, the oceans, the mountains, even the flowers smell better," she said. She returned only once, late in her life, with my sister. She was welcomed back to the small mountain village where she grew up, and after a celebration on the first night, she was asked to say a few words. With a smile on her face and with tears in her eyes, she stood and, in a loud, clear voice, said, "You should see America. It's so beautiful. The oceans, the mountains, even the flowers smell better. Oh, America," she said, "my America." She worked nights in a textile mill for a half-century. She could not read or write. She knew little of history or politics, but she understood clearly the meaning of America: freedom for her family and opportunity for her children. In her heart and in her mind, she was as much an American as were those who came over on the Mayflower. Among the many parts of the American mosaic that I love so much is the fact that almost every American family has a similar story. They're stories of hard times and hard work, of hostility and helping hands, of ignorance and inspiration, of failure and success. Above all else, America is a story of freedom and opportunity, of the great values enshrined in our laws and in our hearts: equal rights, equal justice, equal opportunity for every single person in our society. We must never, ever stop fighting for those values. Thank you all very much for being here this evening.